Hello and welcome to What the F Just Happened Today, your essential guide to the daily shock and awe in national politics. I'm Joe Amditas. Let's get to it. It's Monday, November 15th, 2021. Welcome to day 300. Joe Biden signed the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure plan into law, making it the largest federal investment in infrastructure in more than a decade. In total, the measure contains $550 billion in new funding to improve the nation's highways, roads, bridges, ports, rails, pipes, and public transit systems. It also includes upgrades to the electrical grid and expanded access to broadband internet. Before signing the legislation, Biden said, quote, "We're finally getting this done," end quote, in a nod to Trump, who repeatedly tried and failed to secure a bipartisan infrastructure deal. Biden added, "My message for the American people is this: America's moving again, and your life's going to change for the better," end quote. Trump, meanwhile, said the 13 Republicans who voted for the bill, quote, "should be ashamed of themselves," end quote, for giving Biden and the Democrats a victory. In the House, Democratic leaders expect to vote on the roughly $2 trillion climate safety net and tax package this week and send it over to the Senate, despite uncertainty over the measure's cost. The timing of the Senate vote, however, is complicated by a December 3rd deadline to avoid a government shutdown, address the debt limit, and pass the annual defense policy bill. If the social safety net and climate bill passes the House and the Senate, the total increased infrastructure spending as a share of the economy will eclipse Roosevelt's New Deal. Moving on, nearly 200 nations reached a climate agreement intended to propel the world toward more urgent climate action, but the agreement falls short of what's needed to avert a climate crisis. After 2 weeks of UN COP26 talks, delegates left Glasgow with Earth still on track to blow past the 2015 Paris Accord goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels. The Glasgow Climate Pact does not reflect the urgency expressed by international scientists in their Code Red for Humanity climate report, after delegates agreed to phase down the use of coal power, which is the single biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions, as well as phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies and defer more action on reducing fossil fuel emissions to next year. The UN Environment Program reported that the country's current COP26 commitments between now and 2030 would give humanity less than a 20% chance of keeping warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reported that the world needs to roughly cut emissions in half over the next decade in order to limit the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The world has already warmed 1.1 degrees Celsius. Back in the United States, a federal court kept its block on the Biden administration's vaccine mandate for businesses with 100 or more employees, saying the Labor Department grossly exceeds OSHA's statutory authority. The order from a 3-judge panel from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals instructs OSHA to take no steps to implement or enforce the federal mandate that all large employers require their workers to get vaccinated against the coronavirus or submit to weekly testing starting in January. Lawyers for the Justice and Labor Departments, meanwhile, said stopping the mandate from taking effect will only prolong the COVID-19 pandemic and would, quote, likely cost dozens or even hundreds of lives per day, end quote. Moving on, the Trump administration covered up a 2019 airstrike in Syria that killed 80 people, including women and children. Immediately following the strike, an Air Force lawyer reported the incident as a possible war crime to his chain of command, which required an independent investigation. The military, however, never conducted the investigation into the bombing. Following complaints, the DoD's Inspector General Office launched an inquiry into the March 18, 2019 strikes, but the report was delayed and ultimately stripped of any mention of the bombing. The strike, which included a 500-pound bomb and two 2,000-pound bombs, was one of the largest civilian casualties in the war against the Islamic State, but was not publicly acknowledged by the U.S. military until last week. Back in the U.S., former Apprentice contestant Summer Zervos dropped her defamation lawsuit against Trump. Zervos sued Trump in 2017 after he denied allegations that he had sexually assaulted her. A judge had recently ordered Trump to sit for a deposition in the case by December 23rd. Zervos did not give a reason for ending the case, but her attorneys said she, quote, no longer wishes to litigate against the defendant and has secured the right to speak freely about her experience, end quote. Last month, Trump's lawyer sought to file a counterclaim against Zervos for allegedly harassing, intimidating, punishing, or otherwise maliciously inhibiting Trump's free speech rights. Meanwhile, Steve Bannon surrendered to federal authorities 3 days after being indicted by a federal grand jury on 2 counts of contempt of Congress for refusing to answer questions from the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th Capitol riot. Each count of contempt of Congress is a misdemeanor punishable by up to a year in jail and a maximum fine of $100,000. Bannon did not enter a plea and was released without bail after surrendering his passport. He's due back in court on Thursday. Following his court appearance, Bannon said his supporters should remain focused on taking on the illegitimate Biden regime because, quote, "we're going to go on offense on this. Stand by," end quote. Republicans, meanwhile, warned Democrats that forcing Bannon to comply paves the way for them to go after Biden's aides for unspecified reasons if they take back the House in 2022. Separately, Adam Schiff said the committee investigating the January 6th insurrection will move quickly to refer Mark Meadows for criminal contempt for not cooperating with its investigation. And finally, Republicans have added a total of 5 seats in the House based on redrawn district maps so far, while Democrats have lost one of their seats. Democrats currently hold 220 seats to the Republicans' 213. So far, 12 states have completed their mapping processes, which will continue state by state before next year's midterm elections. In total, GOP-led legislatures and governors will redraw 187 House districts, compared with 75 for Democrats. Republicans need to flip 5 Democratic-held seats in the 2022 midterm elections to take back the majority in the House.
That's all for now. You can find the links and sources for all of these stories on the main website. And as always, visit whatthefjusthappenedtoday.com for the latest news and headlines. Until next time, I'm Joe Anditas.